Donald Trump has picked climate change deniers to run the EPA as well as the Interior Department. An education secretary who's a fundamentalist Christian with a long resume of supporting causes that are notoriously anti-science, and top advisor Steve Bannon, who raises a whole nother set of questions. And here's how the New Yorker describes Bannon. The first sign of Trump's intention to spread lies about empirical reality, 1984 style, was, of course, the appointment of Steve Bannon, former executive chairman of Breitbart. This year, Breitbart hosted stories with titles such as 1,001 Reasons Why Global Warming is So Totally Over in 2016, despite the fact that 2016 is now overwhelmingly on track to be the hottest year on record. Well, my next guest wrote that piece, Lawrence Krauss. He joins us as a contributor at The New Yorker and director of the Origins Project at Arizona State University. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Oh, it's nice to be on, at least virtually.
Well, I want to read a portion of what you wrote in the piece here and pivot to just something I even heard today. You wrote in part that a whole society, did Orwell say, can deceive itself for an indefinite time, and the only check on that mass delusion is that sooner or later a false belief bumps up against solid reality. Science is one source of that solid reality, and the Trump administration seems determined to keep it at bay, and the consequences for society and the environment will be profound. And to that end, to what Orwell said, and putting it in today's context, I saw Senator Cornyn, a prominent Republican and also climate change denier, who showed a picture of snow in the Sahara and said global warming ? He's not the only one, especially within the Trump administration, who believes, I guess, in that 1% of the science community that this whole global warming thing is just some giant PC hoax.
Yeah, well, it's shocking in light of the incredible evidence that's there, and it's testimony to really the power of propaganda, the power of people. What's really great about science is you force your beliefs to conform to the evidence of reality rather than the other way around, and there's just lots of people who would rather not have human industrial activity impact on climate, and they decide the answer. And what we really need in this country desperately and around the world, especially in the 21st century, is public policy based on empirical evidence.
To that end, you and I were preaching to the choir here, but we got to do a lot more than we have right now. More than just acknowledge what's in the Paris Accords and embrace it. We got to lead on it. We're going backwards. Now, no one really knows what Trump thinks really about anything, but if you go by the people he's appointed, I have a question, whether it's Pruitt at the EPA, which he said he wanted to defund the whole thing, McMorris Rogers now over at the Interior, right, who basically ascribes to the same thing. We'll get to DeVos over at Education, but is it in your mind, Larry, that this is more about that they don't believe it, or that they want to defund it because they want deregulation to let business go its way? Meaning, is this a convenient excuse here to let, the Fortune 500 companies do whatever they want, or do they really believe, that there isn't a thing like evolution and this whole climate change is some giant hoax because it's snowing in November somewhere? What's really at the root of this? Well,
it's hard. Of course, I am not a mind reader in that sense, but the evidence seems to suggest that a significant, especially when it comes to climate change, the deniers are done by people who stand to gain financially. I mean, you just have to look, frankly, at the Trump cabinet. It is true that it's hard to know what Donald Trump believes, if he believes anything. But what clearly he's doing is letting himself be influenced by advisors. I'm always wary about putting ideas in Donald Trump's head, because I do think that he's willing to consider other ideas because he has no preconceptions, because he has very little knowledge. But actions speak louder than words, and the appointments that have been made are the worst possible people you could imagine.
And just so nobody thinks that my guess is exaggerating, we literally could have, and will have in all likelihood, the head of our education department, somebody wants to relitigate whether or not, in fact, there is such a thing as evolution. And we're talking about that in America in 2017. But with my time, well, people say, okay, so they don't agree, Larry, with what the scientists have to say, but they do control the purse strings and explain about something like NASA, for example, as you write about. If they pull back funding for NASA to examine, obviously, Earth science, Tell people why that matters.
Well, the point is that what NASA's always done is be able to monitor the Earth to help us prepare for possible disasters, for tornadoes, for weather, not climate, which takes place over a long time, but local weather, for droughts. What NASA's been doing, and in fact it's the only agency that's been able to do that, is basically prepare us to be safer in the immediate term by monitoring what's happening on planet Earth. And by simply defunding, as at least their advisor advised, now they haven't obviously made that yet a policy, what they're doing is threatening people's lives, literally. They're pretending that other agencies can do what NASA can do, but NASA's got the satellites. You can't suddenly say, well, the Interior Department should suddenly monitor the Earth, because the Interior Department doesn't send satellites into space that are essential for this. They're hoping, of course, these Earth monitoring satellites are also useful in providing the data that tell us that indeed global warming is happening. So to some extent, there are people who say, we'd rather not have people access to the data than to actually know the bad news. We'd rather put our heads in the sand and, in fact, rather people be ignorant than disagree with us.
For anybody at home who thinks that my guest is in any way doing a hyperbole, it's not. These are the stated on-the-record positions for these cabinet nominees, and to this point, we haven't heard yet from the president-elect as to whether or not what they believe and what they advocate are his policies as well. So, as they say, you cannot make this stuff up. Larry Krauss, I certainly appreciate some time with you, even on this less than uplifting topic here. But thank you so much for the time.
Well, thanks, and it's important that people hear this stuff. So ultimately, democracy hopefully will depend upon people, resisting at some point.
Knock on wood. Thanks again. All right, everybody, when we come back, we'll pivot to a story far closer to home, but nonetheless, it should raise some eyebrows. Child marriages aren't just happening in countries like Afghanistan. Believe it or not, thousands of children have gotten married in the state of New York. And I'm talking kids as young as 14 and 15. We come back after the break. You're going to meet the Assemblywoman who wants to end it.